Well, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to make sure everyone's here in the right session. This is Microsoft licensing. Everyone still want to stay? Okay, awesome.
Can I just say, don't forget to fill out your evaluation form because you can make discounts.
Perfect, thank you. So good afternoon. Since we're such a smaller group, let's just, before I get started, introduce myself. What do you guys want to get out of it? Just want to figure out the VDI bug or the VDI issue? The licensing issue around it? And we'll talk a lot about it, so you're in the right session. Anything else in particular you want to talk about? Okay. Yes?
Any insight as to whether Microsoft are going to change calls in terms of their current setup and how that might change in the future?
Okay, so how licensing will change in the future for VDA? Question?
On the basis that it never will. Understanding on the basis that it will never change, especially on the supplier side. Just a better understanding is how we make sure that we stay compliant. Because at the moment what we see is a lot of people adopt a lot of VDI and completely forgetting licensing, which as a Microsoft partner is
Right.
great, but for them it's potentially a real liability of people they think about, or they get the wrong end of the stick. Getting real clarity around what you need is really, really difficult, especially from some folks at Microsoft who really don't understand. So I've got high hopes for this one.
Okay. That was a long question, but right. So do me a favor, if you have a question, any doubts about it, just shout it out so we can just kind of take care of it during it because we're going to have enough time to do this. Just from a real, well, I'll walk you through real quick. So my name is Nathan Coutinho. I actually work for CDW out of Chicago. We're a business. We're about a $10 billion business, and I'll kind of go into that just briefly because I know BriForum is not about architecture or marketing and all that kind of stuff. So I want to keep it true to its being. But this is my third BriForum. I usually do the ones in Chicago, and this is my first time they're doing the one in London specifically. So just real quick, this stuff changes all the time, right? So I just want to make sure you guys are up to speed on where to go get information from Microsoft. Their product use rights, all their licensing is all on their website. Yes, it's several hundred pages long, unfortunately, and like the EULA, so it's kind of painful. And some of my teams have actually do this. They actually go through the EULA and they find all the language and they actually let us know, so then I can package it up in something understandable and then I actually present it to our customers. But I don't work for Microsoft. I'm actually not even on the Microsoft team. I actually run a private cloud as well as a mobility team at CDW. So a little bit different, but now this impacts every project, right? So you have to figure this out. And a lot of times when customers come to us and say, hey, I really want to do VDI. VDI is the future. It makes sense for our business. We actually go through this first before they kind of go, because it completely messes up your ROI, right, if you don't actually plan for it correctly. So quick agenda. It's not as bad as it seems. It's not trying to do death by PowerPoint, and I'll try to make it as relevant as possible. I'll do a quick introduction of just myself and my company. I'll go over some industry trends, which you guys will find interesting. I'll cover the basics just around application presentation, desktop virtualization, and then I'll dig into the actual whole VDA issue, and I'll go over some use cases. I'll also talk about Windows 8 and the pending changes that are coming out from Microsoft. So a real quick introduction. We're a $10 billion company, about 8,000 employees based out of Chicago, about 30 offices all over the US and Canada. So we don't technically do business outside of the US and Canada, but we do have partners. So in this market, we partner with Dimension Data. And so they do all our extended Microsoft LARs, all our Microsoft services projects for any customers based in the United States and actually have offices in Europe. So just an idea. So obviously you probably are familiar with Dimension Data. They're really large in the UK and Europe as well. That's our coverage model. The red is all US and Canada for us. That's our primary, and then we go to Dimension Data for pretty much the rest of the world. We do have for like other countries in the Far East, we do have different partners we partner with to expand that reach out to our global customers. All right, that was the marketing stuff, so we're through that. It's awesome. All right, so mobility is exploding. This is kind of an understatement. I mean, everyone knows this now, but really it's getting to the point where it's so bad that people are literally stopping all their infrastructure projects and trying to fix not just the VDI problem, but the expansion of mobility problem. So, for example, CDW, so we have about 6,000 employees. We have about 600 iPads in our organization. 50 of them were bought by the company itself, so they're company assets. The rest of them are all bring your own desktop, and we don't even have technically a bring your own desktop policy yet, but people are bringing these devices in. So it's getting so critical now that people are going back and trying to invest in things like MDM to actually secure these devices. So this is really starting to drive everything we see in the market, including private cloud. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. So smartphones, obviously tablets are proliferating. The price points are coming really down. For some reason, the data plans aren't getting cheaper. I don't know why, but hopefully over time it will. But right now, it's just not, especially in the U.S. Social media is everywhere. I mean, we all use Facebook and LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. But it's definitely linked to consumerization and adoption perspective. And cloud, last year and the year before, it was all about cloud, right? Now, cloud's taking a back seat, and mobility is taking the front seat. But the reality is, all this cloud infrastructure is building up so fast that every app we use on our phones is pretty much tied into the back end. So it's really, really critical. And it's really what's really driving mobility. If we didn't have, things like iCloud's a bad example, but if we didn't have the other back end systems like that, we wouldn't be anywhere today. End users are getting really smart. They're getting so smart that they're starting to come in and they're starting to say, hey, why can't IT provide me something like Dropbox, right? Why do I have to use SharePoint? Why do I have to use a file share? And just to give you an idea of how big this problem is, so 2.5 years ago, so I have a team, I'm out of Chicago, but I have 1 employee in Chicago and I have 29 all over the US. So no one's within a 5-hour drive distance from me, they're all over the place. So the challenge I have is because we do a lot of these types of presentations, right, over pretty much any topic you can imagine, and we want to share these large 24 meg, 30 meg PowerPoint files. So we started using Dropbox, even though the company banned it, and they said, no, you're not using Dropbox, and we all have Macs, so we can get around the firewall issue. And we've been using Dropbox for a while. I was in a meeting with our IT director, and he got this email. We were having a conversation, and he's like, oh man, I can't believe this is happening. And I'm like, what's wrong? And he's like, well, Dropbox is growing so fast at our company that we have almost 600 users using it now. This is 8,000 users. 600 are using Dropbox, and we can control what kind of data is being put in there. It's basically happening while they're not on our corporate network. But the way they know is because every outbound API call that the application's making out through a firewall, we're intercepting with Iron Port, and then we're actually building portals that our CIO and our directors of IT can have access to. So he basically said, he's like, oh man, there's so many people using it. And I'm like, really? People are using Dropbox? I'm playing dumb, obviously. And he says, really? I'm like, really? And he's like, really? I'm like, really? He takes and get his big 30-inch monitor. He moves it towards me and says, check who's user number 5. Yeah, so my team, right? Me and my team. So this is becoming a real problem. The good thing about our IT group is they actually embraced Box.com. So now they're using Box.com to basically fend off all these Dropbox users, because at least with Box, it's encrypted and IT has some control over the data. So when an employee leaves now, boom, we can just take them out of the system really fast. With Dropbox, IT has no control over it whatsoever. So that's starting to really happen. The other thing that's happening, they're getting so smart by using all these cool applications where you can take a picture of something in OCR. They're literally coming in and saying, hey, if I can scan my check and deposit it at my bank, why can't I do that with my receipts and automatically put it into PeopleSoft? Why are our applications so hard to use? So everyone's getting a little spoiled, right? Because enterprise systems don't grow that fast typically. So that's definitely a challenge for us. So consumerization from that point is really, really upon us. This is coming down faster and faster. The other angle is mobile apps. Mobile apps are localized. They can do offline type things. Like the Box app is fantastic in particular. But you can do a lot of offline things now. People want to consume it in that format, in that font size. They're just used to that application. It's really driving device adoption. And the new thing we're seeing is customers are now taking their operational budget dollars and they're moving it to develop mobile apps. Now, most of the time we're seeing this happening in retail. I'm sure it's happening here in the UK too, a little bit in Germany, and then it's starting to expand. But they're literally taking their budget dollars and they're moving it to mobile app development. Now, again, this is mostly consumer from an IT perspective. But we're seeing both internal and external. So example, GE has 75 iOS applications, 75. Right? I mean, everything from a guy going up on a turbine. I actually watched one today, where I actually was in Stonehenge this morning, when I was coming back in, and they were actually installing a fan on a turbine right next to, can't remember the building, and I don't even know which road I was on, actually, quite honestly. But they were installing it, and the thing they told us about what they did with the iPad is they developed an iOS app for these engineers. So rather than pulling all these giant manuals up on top of the turbine, not to mention it's a long way up there, they had to haul these manuals. Now it's all digital. They can scan things. They can actually literally through Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, talk to the engines to program them and fix them, which is pretty brilliant. So you're going to see a lot of that. The challenge, though, with developing applications is there's a big gap. There's a big gap between writing an application versus an app. Like the app usually doesn't have as many functions as the full-blown application. Not yet. It's going to come. Right? We're going to see that dramatically improve over the years. But the reality is you can't really amplify, if you want to call it amplify, every single application. It just can't be done. There are a lot of things where the ISVs are going to take a long time to actually jump on the mobile bandwagon. So we have some time now between what you have today versus an app. So that's why we need client virtualization. It's not going to go anywhere anytime soon or go away anytime soon. And that's why you're here. You want to figure out the whole the VDI story. Now, a couple things I'm not going to talk about. If you want to talk about this after, we will. But it's just, to me, most of our customers are not in this boat, so I don't want to kind of go down this path. With Windows Intune, I'm going to talk about it. VDI suites are actually going away. They're kind of going away with the suites because, frankly, I don't think there were a lot of sales in that space. We're not going to talk about server apps at all, so no SCCM or SCOM and things like that. We're really going to focus mainly on the hardcore client virtualization, and I'm sure that's going to be enough just with VDA alone. So there are a couple big, and this is more of a primer, but from an application virtualization perspective, AppV is included with terminal services. I know most people actually didn't know that in the last couple of years. After, what was it, 2009, 9.1, they actually included it. So if you have SA or you have Windows 2008 R2, you have AppV. The only thing you have to remember is you can only use AppV to deliver applications to that terminal server. You can't use it for your desktops. You still need MDOP for all that stuff. So that's the key part there. From a presentation virtualization perspective, everything's pretty much the same, except they've changed the TS-Cal to RDS-Cal a couple of years ago. And I believe it's still going to be the same with 2012. I didn't put any of that stuff in here because they still haven't completely blessed all this stuff with 2012 yet, but it's pretty much going to be the same as far as we know. The one thing you want to be careful is if you're building virtual servers running terminal services or RDS servers, you still have the vMotion tax problem. So if you don't have enough Windows licenses on each host and you're moving these things back and forth, you have to make sure that a host is always licensed for the maximum possible virtual machines running Windows Server 2008 R2 or 2012. So that still applies, right? So just, we have a lot of people forgetting that actually. And oh yeah, the other one, you need software assurance to actually do your DR testing. So I know there was a lot of concern about that. There's, a lot of people do it without actually having software assurance. Software assurance on your servers is required to actually do the cold server backup and testing. And there's a whole white paper on that alone. It's been the same for probably at least 6 years now. The entitlements changed a couple of years ago. They actually raised the price of RDS because guess what? There's a lot of XenApp being installed today. I mean, our business is still growing with XenApp, which is pretty amazing to me because a lot of people started going down the VDI path. And a lot of my team, what they do is they go and they understand what our customers' needs are. 90% of the time, they don't need VDI. All they need is application virtualization, or rather, presentation virtualization, and XenApp usually does the trick. Let me see. Yeah, I think that was pretty much it for that slide. So what I want to cover real quick, and this is kind of where we get into the meat of it, is from a desktop virtualization perspective, licensing is a little bit different between a Type 1 hypervisor and Type 2 hypervisor. Finally, in all the Microsoft docs, it now actually references Type 1 hypervisors. This only happened in the last 6 to 8 months. Prior to that, they never even talked about any kind of Type 1. And obviously, RingCube is now a part of Citrix, but Windows 8 is going to have their own. So basically, those are the only two. VMware still doesn't have a component like this at all. They're still doing Type 2 with View Local Client, local mode. And then there's MedV on the Microsoft side. Is anyone using the bare bones Microsoft MedV technologies or no? It's usually the response I get. So that's why I think it's just one of those products they put out there, but they're really not having too much luck with that option. And then finally, OS streaming. This is basically your machine booting up, Pixie booting, getting license and booting from the network. Citrix Provisioning Server, HP Manager. These are all the different kinds of basically desktop types of desktop virtualization. For the server-based hypervisor, basically every endpoint needs VDA, and I'll clarify that in the next slide. But effectively, if you're accessing a virtual device session, Windows 7, Windows 8, running in a hypervisor type environment, that endpoint has to be licensed. That's how Microsoft licenses everything on the desktop. So it's always done by endpoint. It's never done by user, especially for VDA. RDS is a little bit different because you can do it by device or by user. From a client-based perspective, in Type 1, Type 2, software assurance covers you loading the client hypervisor on the device and then running 4 VMs. Mind you, that's the only way it's really supported. Now you can do different things like buying retail copies and things like that, but it won't give you the 4 VM advantage. So if you want to buy a laptop or send out laptops with client 1 hypervisors like Zen Client or anything else, then you really need to have software assurance on that desktop. Otherwise, you're going to be buying individual licenses of Windows, which frankly I really wouldn't do unless you're a small shop, didn't have too many of those use cases. So Type 2, this is the most common one. It's pretty much the same for the most part, right? If you have SA on it, you can run all 4 virtual machines. This is Workstation Fusion, not really an enterprise solution by any means, but it is done over and over again. All right, so OS streaming pretty much is an SA benefit. So if you have software assurance on the device, then you can stream to it. If you don't have SA on it, you can't stream to it. Now, technically, you can. There's nothing stopping you from doing it. Just from a compliance perspective, you cannot. One thing to note is that there are a couple models. I think there's literally like 3 or 4 models out there that come with a Windows COA. You know, you open up the thin client, it literally has the Microsoft genuine license on the side. That is specifically designed only to stream to that desktop. You can even, I believe you can actually add SA to it, but it will never be able to access a VAI session. It's just not licensed for it. When you buy that license with it, it's only supposed to be used for streaming. Now, technically, there's nothing on that thin client anyway, so you wouldn't even boot it up and load a client to actually attach to Zen Desktop. But I've had a lot of customers who's like, why don't I just buy that, add SA to it, and then I don't have to buy VDA? Well, it doesn't work because it's not licensed for that. It would actually technically work if you put an SSD in it, but at that point, you're spending probably 500 US, probably a couple £100 to actually get, you know, that technology into it. It's just not worth it. Anyone doing Windows Thin PC at all? To rejuvenate PCs? So software assurance on the desktop. As long as the desktop has software assurance, you get access to Windows Thin PC. That's the same as Windows Fundamentals and the one before that, which was Legacy PCs, I think. I don't see too much of this out there, but it makes some sense if you're trying to like basically get the last ounce of use out of those older desktops that you have. It is actually really fast. When we tested it, we were like, how big and fat is this going to be? And it's actually really fast and really lean, so it's really nice. And it's basically a full Windows desktop for the most part. All right, so here's the meat of the presentation. So VDA, that we've all grown to probably not love for the most part. So VDA is about 100 US, 63 pounds. This is, again, list, probably the highest price you can probably pay for it. I usually start there and work my way down. It is included with software assurance. So if you have software assurance on your desktop, you have VDA. But you have VDA only for that physical endpoint. So it does have, if you have SA, then you also have extended roaming rights, which means if you have a PC at work and you have SA on it and you have access to a virtual desktop, you can go home and turn on your Mac and you can access it remotely, no need for a separate license at all. If you don't have SA, you have 90 days, the same rules. I think these rules have been in place for probably 20 years now. Within 90 days, you can upgrade your OEM license that you bought with your PC, got with your PC, to basically with SA, and you don't have to buy that license, the actual license key / product. But if you wait 90 days and you go past the 90 days, now you actually have to buy the license and software assurance. So it goes up 75 to 150, basically, I would say, in the pound range. You could also skip SA and just buy VDA. But VDA is a subscription, so that can kind of be the challenge.
You know, when you describe you can go home and connect through your Mac?
Right. If you have SA, you can.
If it's not a Mac and it's a tablet or a Linux box?
Doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah. So basically, extended roaming rights, as long as it's your own device, it's not owned by the company, and you're not physically on company property. This is where this gets really dicey, by the way. As long as you're not on company property or affiliates company, it's exactly their words, you're fine. You could use an iPad, you could use an Android device, you could use pretty much anything you want to get into the desktop and consume it.
So when you say per endpoint,
Mm-hmm.
so I've got a PC at work,
Right.
a Mac at home,
Mm-hmm.
do I need 2 VDAs or just the one VDA?
Just one.
Just one.
As
But as long as I've got software assurance on top of VDA.
well, so if you have software assurance, VDA is a benefit of software assurance. So VDA, if you buy VDA, like you don't have SA and you buy VDA for it, VDA already has some of the benefits of SA. So basically, you already have ERR, and then when you go home and use your Mac, it's fine. Here's where people get into trouble, though, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. When you take that MacBook Pro, say it's a MacBook Pro, you take a MacBook Pro and you bring it to work, now you have a licensing problem because technically, you're only allowed to use that license at home, not physically on company property. Is there a way to track this? Not really. I mean, that's where people are running challenges into this, is because it's not easy to track at all. I mean, now it's getting a little bit easier, but you have to invest in more network-based access control technologies to prevent them. I'll actually talk about that in a second.
And sorry.
No, go ahead.
In terms of devices, so if I put a Mac at home and an iPad
Mm-hmm.
and whatever else, I'm okay on all of those?
You're okay on all of them, as long as you're the only user doing it, right? Because your license, it's licensed by endpoint, and the extended roaming rights applies to that user, the primary user of that endpoint. If there's multiple users, that's when it gets really dicey, because technically they want you to buy one for every single user at that point, which, yes?
We have an organisation that's kind of split into two. One side of it has SA,
Mm-hmm.
the other side of it doesn't. What's the best practice for trying to converge that licensing?
I would, in the long run, if you're going to stay Windows for a while, which most of us are, I would go with SA on every device, every primary device.
Best bang for buck in the interim as you're trying to converge that all? Is there a practice that you would follow for that?
So I guess you got to go back to: do you really want to do VD? Do you really want to do VDI, or do you really want to do just application virtualization as in XenApp? If you're doing XenApp, it's way cheaper. Way cheaper. Yeah, basically, you do it by user, you're done, right? You don't have to worry about where they're accessing and all that kind of stuff.
Unfortunately, it's both. It's the VDI plus application virtualization on both sides of the house. So the side that's SA, that's easy, right?
Right.
But the other side, we're kind of still trying to feel our way. It's the best route for the licensing board.
Right.
To try and accommodate both sides of the house. But I know ultimately SA everywhere is a good thing, but we're not there yet.
What I see is customers typically under 2,000 users usually do VDA, but they don't do it for every user. They're doing it only for a handful of users. For the ones that are beyond 2,000, they're already in an EA with Microsoft, so they already have SA on everything. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's certain requirements to be in an EA where you have to kind of have SA, or it comes with the deal. So most enterprise customers are pretty much covered. That's why enterprise doesn't really care too much about it, because they're already covered under it. Did someone else have a question? Okay, perfect. If you think about it, just call it, shout it out. All right, so here's some of the gotchas. So VDA is per endpoint. So this is the unfortunate problem that everyone gets confused with, but it is per endpoint. It's not by user. It is physically by endpoint. The other catch is that if you do VDA and you don't renew your select agreement, you can't technically really use that license anymore. This is the challenge we have in IT when procurement makes a decision and doesn't tell IT. Right? Oh yeah, we've looked at the ROI on it, we didn't really upgrade to Windows, so we're just going to get rid of it. And it's too late. They don't pay their thing, and now you have to pay licensing fees to actually renege your contract, basically, or renew your contract. So be careful with that, because that's happened actually a couple times over the last couple of years, starting with VCD. There's so many problems with retail copies, I would just avoid it. I mean, if you want to talk offline, I'll tell you all the details, but retail copies just should not be used. It's so painful. Not to mention, it's not even in the use case. Here's the other issue that I ran into. So VDA is not exactly the same as desktop license plus SA. So for example, when you buy a desktop with an OEM and then you add SA on top, you have the rights to run 4 VMs locally. Now technically, if you don't have all that and you just buy a naked PC and you put VDA on it, right, you could run Windows on it, but you don't have access to those 4 VMs. And there's an actual document on, now there's not many people doing that per se for that purpose, right? Most people are trying to put a thin client on it or make it a thin client and access a remote desktop. But the reason why is they want you to buy PC, right? They don't want you to buy a naked PC, and that's been going on for years. Yes?
With that full VM benefit, do you have to, what key do you use on those full VMs?
So everything I'm talking about is all based on a centralized activation server. So you use the Microsoft KMS, you set it up for the first 25 PCs, and after that you just don't worry about it. So every time VMs boot up, it's going to self-activate from your local server, Or you could, I guess you could do it with Microsoft too. Most of our customers just do it themselves because 25 is usually not that bad.
So just to be clear, so I've got a Windows desktop with SA.
Yes.
I want to stand up a virtual machine for that using the data center.
Mm-hmm.
Activate that virtual machine by KNS, but I don't have to buy a specific license for that operating system.
Correct. Yeah, so in your example, end user with the desktop that has SA wants to access a Windows 7 instance that's in your farm. SA, you don't have to buy anything else at all. And from a KMS perspective, I mean, you can do the KMS a lot of different ways. You can do Microsoft, you can do individual. But yeah, basically what happens is it comes online, it goes into AD, it finds the KMS server, it activates, you're done. And every time it activates, even if you're like thawing VMs and doing persistent and non-persistent and trashing them and reloading them, it's not going to matter. Because Microsoft's not even counting it. They can't. There's no way they can. Like the amount of people that are using like, development VMs as an example. They'll throw on like a couple hundred VMs and they'll throw them off. It would mess up KMS. So they will look at it, and typically if you have an EA, and even Select and Select Plus, they'll evaluate it at the end of the year and like, okay, you have 1,000 people. Why are there 10,000 desktops that were activated? That's kind of fishy, right? But most of the time they say, oh, VDI, okay, it doesn't matter. Let's see. Oh yeah, the dreaded per socket question. So here's the fun part about this. This is actually now in their documentation. Like for the last 3 years, we've had these customers calling in and saying, hey, I don't believe in VDA, which I can understand the frustration a little bit, right? But I'm going to buy a server. I'm going to buy 2 socket licenses for Windows 2008 R2 Data Center or 2012 Data Center Edition, because it gives you unlimited VMs, right? So I'm going to buy 2 socket box, 2 licenses. I'm going to run as many Windows 2008 server licenses and give those server desktops to my end users. There's a lot of issues with this. One, Vue and Citrix don't even recognize it as an actual, when you're actually building pools, it's not looking for Windows 2008 server, it's looking for Windows 7. So you have a lot of issues around it. The reality is now Microsoft actually says, yeah, you can do it, but if you do it, because you're connecting to a server, you need an RDS cal. So I think one of the challenges we had early on was a lot of customers said, hey, this is the way I'm going to do it. And we're like, look, we're not going to endorse this because it's not even a use case, at least from Microsoft's perspective. And then we'll support you if you want to do it. They put it in, they bought the licenses. Vue would not connect to it. In this case, it was VMware Vue. It would not recognize that VM at all because that OS is not what it's looking for. The other challenges you could possibly have is, well, what if your app is not really, maybe your app is just designed only for Windows, Windows 7 desktop, not a Windows server. Now, we should have had this problem. It probably went away over the years through multi-win and all that stuff, but you still have some applications that are looking for Windows 7, looking for Windows 8. I can only imagine it's going to get worse over time. So in general, this can be done. Right? Just be careful. I mean, I would almost recommend not using a broker and using RDS to get to these desktops. But the reality is, it is doable today. It's just not recommended. Yes?
Just to add to that, I don't know VMware's plans, but I know from speaking with Citrix lately that it's unconfirmed, but there are plans on the horizon to adjust
Yeah.
desktop so that it will recognize
Yeah.
WinServer
As a desktop operating
yeah.
system.
But that's interesting. So just to confirm, what you're basically saying is Microsoft is saying if you want to do that, in addition to your Zen desktop licenses and everything, they want you to buy an RDS cal.
Because if you, and you really shouldn't read this, but if you're really bored and you want to read it, you can. But if you read the Windows Server EULA and the PER, the products use rights, it actually says that if you are remoting in for administration, you don't need a license, which we all in IT have that, right, typically. But if you use it to actually use the desktop as a machine, then you need RDS, either an app or, that's kind of where they get you, really. And a lot of people didn't really realize that when they went down that path. Now, I don't see too much of this out there. I mean, there is a couple. Usually it's more cost-conscious, really large farms that only have one particular application that's really basic. I don't know if I covered everything there. Yeah, I did. OK, so RDS has been around forever. Used to be TS-Cal, now RDS-Cal. The nice thing about this is you can buy it per user or per endpoint. So you can kind of choose depending on your environment and how you do it. So the way they defined as to when you need an RDS cal, so it's not just if, let me put it this way. If you're planning on using any of the RDS tools in the RDS stack, you need an RDS cal. And I'll explain an example with that. So say you want to stand up a very basic VDI environment, right? You have Hyper-V and you have a couple Windows 7 VMs. And you want to use the Windows RDS broker, which is built into Windows 2008 R2 and now Windows 2012 server. if you use that broker to broker a connection between an endpoint user and that virtual machine, that person needs an RDS CAL, even though it's already using VDA. So now you get a double whammy where you have to buy the RDS CAL for the user or the device, and you have to buy VDA. And the reason why is that the way they're looking at it is like, okay, what if they didn't use the Microsoft technology? You would still have to buy a View license, right? A VMware View license. You would still have to buy Citrix Zen Desktop license. So why should we just give it away for free? So that's kind of the reasoning behind it. And it's really muddy when you read these documents. Now, the good news is that no one really uses this. I mean, it's very rare to see someone using this. I mean, if you go out to see the VDI deployments out there, it's Zen Desktop and View. These are the two that are fighting for pole position in this market, at least today. It might change over the next couple of years. But,
you know,
yes.
the RDS licensing, you know, there's variations on that where there's like an external RDS license.
External connector?
Connector.
Right.
Can I just ask one question
Sure.
about that specifically? We've been told we can use that for our student access.
Yes.
So they can connect to the RDS server externally on their own personal device. Does external still mean with they bring that external device on campus?
No. Students,
Well, how come other people have said it is?
well, so this is where the gray area comes in. So as long as your Microsoft rep is on kosher, I would actually have that in writing,
Yeah.
but as long as they're kosher with it. So usually in education, there's a little bit more leniency.
Yeah.
I mean, there really is. And because you can't really, control it from a student perspective, I mean, because they are going to bring those devices in. On paper, yes, it's supposed to be physically external. We see students doing it all the time.
Yeah.
So, and Microsoft's not going to go after an educational institution just for that one little issue, which is the same device, same laptop. Corporate's way more strict,
Yeah.
right? So I would have that conversation with your rep, and I would make sure that's in writing.
Down on paper?
Sorry?
They write it down on paper?
They would. I mean, I don't know, your campus agreement, right? Yeah. They usually will. So you can actually ask them to modify the PER.
Okay.
You can actually do that. We've had customers do that when the first broker came out, and there was no such thing as VDA, and even before VCD, they were updating the PER. So you can do that. Sometimes it just depends on the size of the organization. Like customers that have 120,000 desktops, they'll do it in a second.
Yeah.
Oh, they'll be willing to do it. It'll still take a year to get it done, but from a legal perspective, it always takes some time. So MDOP, I think I threw this in here mainly because of AppV. So if you have software assurance on your desktop, you can basically add MDOP, which is $10, roughly £6, €7. By the way, my calculations are just as of yesterday's rate for conversion. So I started with the US dollar and I went back down, and I understand that might be a little off, but it's kind of in the ballpark for the most part. So MDOT requires SA, and you get all this stuff. I don't know if you use all this stuff, but the main one here is AppV. So if you're trying to deliver applications to your terminal services, to your desktops, laptops, this is the way you get AppV, and this is how most of our customers do it from an AppV perspective. All right, so let's talk about the announcement. So when this came out at MMS, I think 6 weeks ago now, I blogged about it, and Brian Madden blogged about it the next day. And between us, I think we found like 5,000, 6,000 hits in the span of 8 hours. It was ridiculous how much we actually saw. And the first two are not that exciting. Windows to Go, putting Windows on a USB stick, it's now a benefit of SA. Before, I don't even think it was recognized as an option before. Now it's recognized. So by the way, this is like VMware Ace from 3 years ago, being able to put it on a stick, and I don't even know if people are still using this anymore. I know Mocha 5 does a lot with this, and they have their own product that does it. But I don't know if it's a use case, but that's what SA brings you that benefit now. Windows RT, and this is the fun part where everyone's really irritated about. So if you have a device that runs Windows RT, or this is the new ARM-based Windows that's going to come out on the new tablets this fall, you don't need VDA for this device. Now here's the kicker. If you have an iPad, you do need a license. So basically, they're saying is if you buy a Windows tablet, you get an advantage. If you don't buy a Windows tablet, you don't. Tough luck. Mind you, they haven't mentioned Office at all in this. I know Windows RT has a basic mobile Office, but they haven't really said Office 2010 as in, so if you don't need VDA, do you still need a extended roaming rights or SA on Office to be able to access it? They haven't said anything about it yet. So this is all they blogged once about it, and there's been radio silence for 6 weeks. So my guess is they said as soon as they get closer to RC2, with Windows 8, which is probably November at this point, or a little bit before, we'll have more and more information about this. Now here's the piece that really rattled people's brains, and the main one for our conversation here. CDL, Companion Device License. So this is another add-on device, add-on license to the product. So you could do MDOP and you can do CDL on top, or you could just do CDL. But basically, it lets the end user, the primary end user, say you have a person with a desktop, and that desktop has SA, you add CDL on top, that person now can add 4 devices, whether it's their own or company-owned, it doesn't matter, and they can access VDA as part of that license now. So there's no more counting and stuff like that. It's just basically they have it, they can add 4 devices. They're doing 4 because everything else is 4. VM's 4 and Enterprise Edition and stuff like that. Same thing with Windows Desktop as well. So you can use it for your iPhone, your Android tablet, your iPad, pretty much anything you want. The fun part is pricing's not announced yet. If I had to guess, no one has told me this, I'm guessing it's going to be 20 to 30 US. So probably under 15 pounds per device. But again, that's just pure speculation. I'm just trying to figure out how they would price this. And keep in mind, so everyone's really upset about this. They're like, oh my God, now I need to buy another license. Well, let's go back before. And in fact, I'll show you what it was. But before, you needed VDA for every single physical device. And I'll walk you through that illustration here in a second. Couple things people forget are the RDS and Cal versions. So a lot of people will upgrade to Windows 2012 Server this fall. They'll upgrade XenApp, and they forget about their CALs. The CALs may not have SE on them, so they don't actually upgrade for free, so you have to go buy new CALs. The other thing is your Windows Server CALs. So we see this a lot. Someone went to Windows 2000 and they bought SA on Windows 2000 Server on all the CALs, and then they just decided to drop SA, but they kept buying the server upgrades over the years, but their network CALs are still really old. But since it doesn't actually alarm you on it, right? Actually it does. People turn the licensing server off typically. But just be careful with it. I mean, if anyone's accessing something on a Windows server or DHCP server or even DNS, you need the most current version of whatever that server is running in terms of a CAL for both RDS and this one actually does get forgotten a lot, so I don't know if you guys are looking at it, but you definitely want to. How do you track all this, right? You go buy CDL, or you don't buy CDL, you buy VDA. It's like next to impossible. There are no tools that are provided by Microsoft to track who's using what. So you could do a couple things. You could prevent them from accessing from AD. You could do it through Citrix Gateway or NetScaler or whatever you're using, even third-party products, right, that are coming in from the outside. On the network, it's really hard. I mean, you can do things like terminal server access, no terminal server access in AD, but it's really hard to manage. So some people are doing it through MDM, right? So they're saying if you don't have MDM on your device, you will not get access to Citrix at all. And then people are also using this technology from Cisco called Cisco ICE, and I know there's a couple others. I think Foundry and I think HP have these technologies too, where it's so smart, right? You bring your device to work, before it gets an IP, it's looking for the authorization for that device to actually talk. So this is basically network access control on steroids, right? If it can talk, then it gets access to only the systems it needs. So we're starting to implement this in our network. So we have a guest network for Wi-Fi and a corporate network for Wi-Fi. And like everyone else in their environments, everyone's bringing their own devices to work now, sometimes up to 4 devices. I mean, I have guys that work for me that carry 2 tablets. Some used to carry 2 laptops. They carry 1 laptop, a BlackBerry that's connected to Wi-Fi, an iPhone that's connected to Wi-Fi, working home. I don't know why, but many people do that. 2 iPads. So now they have like 5 or 6 devices. They're all trying to get on the corporate network. So everyone's jamming like the business users as well as the personal users, and it's getting out of control. So with ICE, you can actually prevent these things from happening, and you can also prevent things like, okay, if you bring in your own iPad as an example, there's a certain element of risk more than an employee-owned device, right? And there's privacy laws and all the other fun stuff you have to worry about. But you can do cool things like saying, all right, when this iPad connects in, right, it must be enrolled in MDM as an example. So you can force it to go out to your MDM provider like AirWatch, or we use MOS 360 at CDW. But you can basically make it go outside, connect in, it'll automatically download the Citrix profiles and all that stuff. It'll secure the device, put the PIN on it. Then when they come in again, when it tries to authenticate, it'll say, okay, so this is the MAC address that was actually authenticated before. It can only see the front-end XenApp servers. It cannot see anything else. It cannot ping any other device on the network. It can't attach to a certain router. It cannot go to this building. You can do everything from a Cisco ISE perspective because it's taking the networking, all the Wi-Fi access points, and it's basically giving you now network intelligence, which is something that MDM doesn't do. MDM is really putting policies in your device and making you do remote wipes and things like that. But now you can actually say, you know what, if I only have VDA for these users, I'm only going to restrict it to these users on these devices, and that's it. Now, this is kind of a headache because now you have to implement more technology, right, to actually prevent this from happening. But this is the reality of what we do today. Remember I said mobility is hot? This is what customers are doing. They're literally moving projects aside to do this kind of stuff, and making sure the network is completely secure. And it's not so much from preventing, it's just making sure people have the access to the right technology, which is getting to be a little bit hard, quite frankly. And that's what I meant by more stuff to buy and manage. So you keep adding a Cisco ISE, you add another technology, MDM technology, and you have kind of an administrative nightmare, quite honestly. But you kind of have to do it. Now you could also do the other route and say, no personal devices, end of story. The problem is you can't control it. That's problem number one. You can to a certain extent, but most customers are struggling with it. And number two, you kind of have unhappy employees. I talked to a customer, this was about 16 months ago. They're a global company, and probably 240,000 users. And they said, a completely different perspective. He's like, we want to give our end users what they want. Because if we don't give them what they want, we're not going to be able to hire these employees. And this is a company where they do a good share of hiring from Oxfords and Harvards and Yales. And they're like, these people are coming out of college today. They've only seen a Mac. You know, my son, when he grows up, 15, 16 years ago and goes to college, he'll never have seen a PC. Right? He'll probably use an iPad and only a touch device, and it's going to rapidly change over now. They don't want to use an all IBM PC. He's like, I cannot give a 21-year-old coming in or 24-year-old coming into work today an all Windows PC. It's just not going to work. I've got to make it work for them as to their work style. And in some places they're not even teaching cursive writing anymore. So it's kind of really interesting how our at least the post-Gen Y folks are evolving really fast. So it's something to think about. And it died. All right, here we go. So use cases. So this is really straightforward. This is the current model as it is today. So if you guys have seen my blog, I use Bob as the fictitious user that has all these issues with VDA. So I'm going to continue using Bob. So Bob's guide, work, right? He has a PC, he has a work laptop, and he has a work-provided iPad. Today, because they have centralized his desktop, if he wants to use the centralized desktop, he has VDA licenses that have been bought and assigned for all 3 devices. So he's got 3 devices that have VDA. So that's the legal compliant way to do it. Since it has VDA and VDA inherently has software assurance, he can go home and he can use his little iPad at home to access work or whatever device that is, his Mac, and that actually shouldn't have a Windows there, so that's a mistake. So he doesn't really need any more licensing here because he has extended roaming rights on his work PC, that primary PC, or actually any of these devices. He can roam freely as long as he's outside. The challenge comes in when he brings that personal iPad to work. Now, all of a sudden, that device needs to be covered. Again, no way to track this. This is something you guys need to be aware, mostly through your BYOD policy, your corporate IT policy, things like that. And by the way, unless you actually set strict rules and take action against it, no one's going to follow it. Because this is really hard to do. I mean, just setting the policy is one thing, but trying to enforce it is kind of a nightmare. So that's kind of how it works today. Now, post Windows 8 launch, so this is when Windows RT is out, Windows 8 is actually out, and they've actually announced all the rest of this stuff. If Bob now has a Windows RT device that he uses at home to connect to work, and he brings that RT device at home, now you don't need that Windows license anymore. So because Windows RT inherently has a benefit of SA, as long as Bob has SA on these primary devices of his, he is covered to be able to access it. So again, this is exclusive to Windows RT. If I had to bet, not saying that anyone has said anything to me at all, this is going to change. And it'll probably include every other, it's kind of an antitrust borderline issue, quite honestly. But it is their product, so they can say basically how they want, how you use their products and what the benefits to each product are. But basically, as of right now, it's exclusive to Windows RT. So it's not even inclusive to Windows tablet that runs today with an actual full-blown processor. Windows RT tablet running the ARM processor with Windows RT on top can access VDI, no issues at all. Everyone's kind of pissed off about this, right? Because guess what? Everywhere you go, there's an iPad or an Android device, mostly iPad. But you know, Android's growing really fast as well. So today, you have to buy that VDA license. So you still need, well, actually, it's right there. You still need, so assuming that's the iPad and that's the RT device, that left-hand side one still needs a VDA license. Now, I expect it to change. I'm speculating, heavily speculating, because it's been literally radio silence at this point. But as we get closer to the fall, we'll hear more about it. So in summary, if you're doing VDI, so if that's your chosen path, right, and if you want to do basically give someone a virtual desktop that's running in a farm somewhere, you really need VDA. Either it comes through SA or you buy it per device and you buy the subscription model on your select agreement and volume licensing and stuff like that. Every device that's owned by the company needs to be covered by VDA if you plan to use it. In an EA agreement, pretty much every device is covered. In a select agreement, you have to kind of make the call as to how many devices, select plus, how many devices you have, and then you enroll everything that you need to. When it gets to open licensing, open business, open value, this is where it gets a little grainy because you can kind of mix and match and buy whatever you want. But again, the same rules apply. If the company owns the device, it needs to be covered. For CDL, just look for more information in the next couple months. We'll have some more data about that shortly. So just final thoughts, because you know I do a lot with mobility today. You know, you can't really give your end user everything they want. I mean, that's just not the right approach. But the one thing what we've seen most successful companies are doing today is that they're planting IT people in business units, and they're really truly understanding what our end users are doing. I mean, it's not just Office and Word anymore. I mean, if you go back 10 years and you think about it, if we went out to the business, the end users, right, and say, hey, what would make your life better? They would be like, I don't know, give me a faster computer. Right? It wouldn't be, give me a SharePoint site. Although we tried, we gave them a SharePoint site, and guess what? We have hundreds of sites that no one uses, typically in most organizations. Not really user-friendly. Today, if you go back to that same user and you ask them, this is a savvy user, but if you go back and say, hey, what would make your life easier? They'll say, give me Dropbox. We're getting that from our own people. Our customers are getting that from their own people. So the user experience on mobility is driving adoption in enterprise, which is a little scary because it's not all figured out from a security perspective, but we're going to get there. So definitely start going down that path. I'm not saying necessarily build mobile apps, but something you want to think about. Question, sir?
And if you have a lot of consultants from other companies coming into our company using our VDI, what is the basis for us to think about?
So it's a good question. So the question was, for those of you who didn't hear it, is if you have a lot of consultants coming into your company, how do you license for VDI? So every one of those users has to have a VDA license. So you buy it because they're accessing your system. So if, say, 100 consultants come in, right, and maybe it's 100 consultants come in for half a year, and then the latter half a year, it's a whole another set of 100 consultants. You buy 100 licenses of VDI, right? So basically, those endpoints are the devices that are going to be basically assigned VDA. When they leave, you have 90 days to reassign. Oh, actually, you have to wait 90 days, and then you can reassign it to someone else. So you don't have to keep buying for every single desktop. If they leave and they come back later, and this is a nightmare to manage, quite honestly, because you're never going to have 100 come and 100 leave, and it's never going to be that easy. It's like the perfect world scenario is you buy every single desktop at the same time. It doesn't happen. Right? Everyone is, you always 20 here, 40 here, and you have all these different versions of desktops and laptops in your company. But you need a VDA license for every single endpoint that they use. And if they do leave, 90 days, and you can reassign it. Actually, it's 90 days from the first time you assign it. It's not when they leave. So basically, if they start in January and they leave in April 1, you can reassign it to someone else immediately. And again, none of this is tracked. So it's more based on the honor system. And that, frankly, a lot of stuff from Microsoft is based on the honor system. So you can get away with it as long as it makes sense and you're not really robbing them blind or cheating them or anything else like that.
It gets pretty close to bring your own, really.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we're starting to see a little bit more adoption in terms of not only bringing your own technologies on the back end, but also like per diems. Like we're starting to see customers saying, okay, here's $1,500 every year or every 2 years, buy your own devices, don't call us for help. Which is kind of scary because unless you have a container where they can work in, which would be Citrix or VMware View, and they can't take stuff out of it, it gets really concerning from a security perspective. The other challenge is you have some non-savvy users. I mean, I'll just use an example. So my wife, she checks email and stuff, can't fix a computer, and trying to have her reboot the Apple Airport Express, and the routers is a nightmare because she doesn't know what she's doing. I just actually put a surge protector that just powers up the whole system. Everything goes off in the house. Everything goes back on. Everything works fine. But you've got users like that. And when they buy their own, just an example, if she worked for a company like that gave them a BYOD policy, and she went and bought her Mac, first of all, she'd be frustrated because she wouldn't know how to even install the Citrix receiver, which is really easy to do. But then when it broke, she wouldn't know how to fix it. She would want to call someone at help desk, which they wouldn't have anymore. So those are the sticky parts now that are getting really confusing.
So today we provide every consultant with a computer, and then we have SA and desktop software.
Right.
In this case, we need to calculate, is it better for us to let them bring their own and we use an VDI and still be inside our network when they are working? So it's a bit about the calculation, what is the best cost for us?
Yeah, it's usually it's going to be by, I mean, it's as straightforward as how many devices. Well, it's not how many devices they use, but basically you count the primary users and the endpoint, the primary endpoint basically, the primary user's endpoint. So if you have 100 consultants, it's 100 VDA licenses. I mean, that's straightforward.
If the consultant comes in with their own laptop running their own version of Windows,
Mm-hmm.
and you're, say, just delivering to them like a streamed app or something from an app server, what's the...
So XenApp as an example.
Yeah.
So a little bit different scenario. So and this is very typical actually. So they come in. You would still need RDS though. So if they're, I mean, it depends on how you license it. If you bought a bunch of user cals, right, and you had excess user cals, you could assign them. Let's say 90 days, same thing, right? You can't reassign for 90 days, same issue. Actually, all Microsoft software has that, the 90-day rule. But yeah, you could do that. I mean, either way, if they're accessing something that's on your system, you're going to need a license, no matter how you look at it. Short of putting the file on a thumb drive and sneaker netting it across or emailing it across. Yes, that's pretty much it. We do that with our own consultants today. So our IT shop's about 350 people, but a lot of them are developers because we write our own apps for ERP, which is a whole nother story. But interestingly enough, we use XenApp at work. So we have 75 XenApp servers for about probably 5,000 concurrent users. All Windows 2008 R2, x64 provisioning server, C7000 HP chassis with 2 provisioning servers in each chassis. And it's rock solid. I mean, it's a whole company uses it. But when we have consultants come in, we actually have to reassign. So we actually bought extra licenses. I mean, we're a big Microsoft partner. We have to do it by the book. We don't have really a choice, right?
But that's kind of session-based desktops, though.
It's a session-based. Actually, we don't actually do session-based desktops at all. We just do session-based apps. We will only publish apps. We don't do desktops at all. And you're starting to see a little bit more doing that now. In the past, you kind of didn't want to do that because you don't get as many users on it, right? You get just all these weird issues with it. Now it's not as bad.
So you're saying that you have your own, not your own, company-provided laptop,
Right.
with Windows on it. You can probably go and install whatever you want on that operating system. Sounds very unintelligently managed, but then when it comes to using corporate apps, they're all pushed out to you from the XenApp service.
So CDW corporate, so there's 2 camps. There's the Mac users, which I'm one of them, which there's really no control over it. It's more common sense, and they are going to push down Cisco ICE pretty soon to us, so we're going to have some sort of governance around our desktop. But we all use the common sense rule, encrypt our hard drive, stuff like that. But we access everything through XenApp. So I have Citrix receiver loaded. I have all my apps on my dock. Click on app, go straight through NetScaler into our system to access all our ERP. I have Office 2011, so I'm using just as an email client, but that's about it. And now Box, so we're adding Box as a SaaS application to get all our files everywhere through my entire team.
And life before Box, how are you kind of saving files and stuff now, just standard network drives?
Yeah, standard network drives. Unfortunately, a lot of my guys are consultants and they're out in the field, and they can't VPN in and transfer gigs of information, so they would host everything locally. Before Box, we used Dropbox, even though we're not supposed to, but it was all non-confidential, like publicly available stuff. Before Box, we tried using Groove, but that was when we all used Windows. So 95% of my team is all Mac only. I'm the only one that doesn't use Windows at all. More from a just can I do it perspective. Now I do use Citrix, so there is some Windows there, right? So I have to access my ERP app, but I just use Office 90% of the time, so it doesn't matter. I mean, for my guys that use Visio, they can't do it. They have to use it. And we have Visio loaded in XenApp too, so but they all like booting up a Fusion VM and basically getting in and using whatever they need to do. I was going to mention something else. I'll come to that in a second. Consider building your own mobile apps. Now, this is mostly external, so a lot of customers are kind of making this investment. In fact, the last time we polled customers about this, a lot of them are seriously thinking about starting to create their own apps. Now, again, this is probably more consumer-facing than your own user-facing, but we've seen a lot of people do some really cool things with really, I don't know, a couple hours in the iOS toolkit with the SDK and actually building apps that make sense for the users. But again, it's a big investment sometimes, so you got to be careful with it. If mobile apps are not an option, obviously virtualize it. That's what we're talking about for the most part here. One thing that gets forgotten a lot is profile virtualization. Shockingly, when we're talking to customers about VDI, they have no idea about user profiles. And it's just kind of like, what are you doing today? Oh, we just let the user profile sit on a local computer and we don't worry about it. Well, you really have to worry about it, because if you don't worry about it, then you're going to basically end up with those bloated profiles. So we've seen a tremendous increase in all the profile virtualization products getting bought and installed. AppSense at the top of the list. They're obviously the richest suite that's out there for profile virtualization. But now it's included in VMware View, Citrix Profile Services, in XenApp and XenDesktop. That's been around for a while. And then there's the third-party stuff that you can buy as well. My order, typically, what I tell customers, and everyone's kind of different, so it really depends on what you're really trying to achieve. But I would always start with profile, because your profiles are centralized and figured out, right? Then do your apps, because guess what? Your apps are storing their data in the profile, which is already centralized. Then do presentation, because guess what? Now your applications are centralized, right? And your profiles are centralized, so you're basically adding a layer. And finally, go to desktop virtualization, because the above three are all centralized already. It's not necessarily a surefire way to do this, because you have different applications, but that typically helps customers. What doesn't work is when you try to do all of this at the same time with two people. We've seen projects, very ambitious projects. They want to do 10,000 desktops in 2 months. Crazy stuff. This cannot be done. Unless you have the bodies and it's been tested for a while, and you've piloted it and you've done the POCs. That's where we see most of this is it comes in from up above and saying, we have to do VDI, get it deployed next week, right? This is what happens, like typically CIOs or whoever goes to a big conference will be like, oh, everyone's doing virtual desktops. And then we get hit with the installation and implementation of it. So the reality is take your time, you have to, because this cannot be done in 30 days. At least not done well, especially for a lot of users. I'll provide, when you get the decks, you'll get the links to all the different sites that are out there. I'm actually going to add one more. There's actually a document that differs between VDA versus SA, and I'll add that in there too. Finally, even though we do business in the US and Canada, we have tons of collateral that you guys can use, technical nature. The hard part is finding it. So it's cdw.com is our website. You basically click on solutions, and you don't have to sign up for an account, you don't have to buy anything from us. You go online, all our collateral. We pump out 4 to 6 white papers a month, a lot of case study videos of how customers are using this technology. From a desktop perspective, private cloud, public cloud, you name it, we're doing it. If it's an IT, we probably have a solution for it. So again, you don't have to buy anything for us specifically, but you can definitely use it. Feel free to use it. And that's all I really had. So I know I'm actually done a little early. Is it possible? Yeah, I think so. So questions? Because I know everyone's environment is going to be a little bit different, so I'm curious as to. Yes, sir.
We've been rolling out and been using VDI for quite a while, and we give access to our staff and students, our staff on and off campus with their own personal devices and on our devices. But
Okay.
we're restricted or limited to how we can deliver it to students.
Okay.
Which is a bit bizarre, because that's kind of the math that you want to get people, that audience to use, given Microsoft and Google are doing cloud-based solutions that we've kind of bought into.
Right.
So why are they doing it? Why are they making it so difficult?
So my perspective, and this is not Microsoft's perspective. So by the way, the question was, why is it so difficult, right? Why is there a separation in how they do the licensing? It's still based on how they've been doing licensing for 20 years.
I mean, the analogy is, when you, for example, we buy so many concurrent licenses with our VDI vendors, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, you can't go beyond that. So
Right.
why don't we just buy the same number of Microsoft licenses that will match the licenses from your
Right.
VDI supplier? In our case, it's Quest.
Right.
So we'll never exceed it. So we'll never.
Right. I hear the concern. I mean, my theory is the same: is that there should be a concurrent user license for Windows, actually for Office too, quite honestly, because that's the other forgotten part that you have to deal with. And everyone's asking for it. My guess is that it will come over time. I think we have to wait and see what happens with Windows 8, because I think there's going to be some additions. I've been saying this for like 4 years, so I'm still waiting. But at least the current changes that they made is actually good. It's better. It's not good. It's better. It's better than what we had, but we're still not there yet. And I think looking at it from their perspective is they don't want to kill their OEM business. And that's really what's pushing it back. And they're saying, okay, we can't hurt our relationships with all these hardware providers, Toshiba, whoever else. Because as soon as we do this per current, Windows on OEM is gone. When people have an option to buy Windows OEM, or don't have to buy Windows OEM, they're going to move to something else.
But they provide Windows in the cloud now, so Office in the cloud.
Office in the cloud. Actually,
Which is the, you know.
you're talking about Office 365, right?
Yeah.
So,
Or Google Docs or Google Drive, that kind of thing.
so interestingly enough, when you buy a license of Office 365, you can actually access it from 4 different devices. So I think, in my words, right, Office 365 is kind of an experiment of how the model is going to evolve. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to go, I mean, this is not rocket science. Everyone's going to go to a subscription model, right? In 5, 10 years, there's not going to be any more, 1 more licenses, 2 more. It's all going to be subscription based. That's the future of whatever we're doing. Eventually, maybe hosted by a cloud. It really depends, right?
Well,
On
I mean, they're buying into that academia market where,
Right.
you know, you look at our brand and students will know, we're using Google Docs
Right.
or we're using Microsoft.
Right.
With the view that they'll use it when they graduate.
Right.
So they're going down that model, but yet when we want to deliver a desktop with their products on it, do all that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting model because it hasn't changed for a long time. And if you think about it, the EULA really hasn't changed that much since even before XP, 95. So part of the reason is again, when they start changing things dramatically, it affects a lot of things what they do. So I think part of it's a legal issue with how they write the EULAs, but I think they will get there. I just don't know when and how long it's going to take. Good question. It's the frustrating part for everyone, quite frankly. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you. I'll stick around if you guys have questions. Have a great conference. We've got a whole another day of a lot of great speakers. So thank you very much.